I never believed in fate, not when I was a surgeon working 16-hour shifts, not when I watched people die on operating tables, and certainly not when I died myself. My name was Dr. Nathan Cole, trauma specialist, father of no one, husband of none, servant of chance. I used to believe that knowledge could bend destiny, that skill was stronger than time. I was wrong. It happened in a tunnel outside Kyoto. A multi-car crash, flames licking through twisted steel. I had been there by coincidence, a conference on emergency response. When the first car burst, I ran toward it, not away. I remember pulling a man from the wreckage, smelling gasoline on my hands, shouting orders no one could hear over the screaming. Then, a flash, white, weightless, and silence thicker than water. They say your life flashes before your eyes, but for me it didn't. What came instead was the feeling of unfinished work, a patient's pulse I couldn't save, a promise I never made, a purpose I never found. The kind of ache that follows you across lifetimes. When I opened my eyes again, the light was colder. The air carried smoke, wood smoke, not gasoline. I was lying on rough straw, staring up at beams darkened by soot. Outside, someone shouted in a language I didn't know, yet somehow understood. My hands, broad, calloused, not mine. The scent of iron and sweat clung to them. When I tried to speak, another man's voice came out. They called me Arden. They said I'd fallen from a horse near the northern ridge. But I knew better. I hadn't fallen. I'd been delivered. At first, I thought it was a dream, a lucid hallucination of the dying mind. But dreams don't ache in your ribs or sting in your palms. Dreams don't smell of mud, fire, and fear. And dreams don't look at you. Not the way that woman did when she found me by the stream, eyes full of worry and something else. Recognition. You ever wonder what happens after you die? Do you simply vanish, or do you wake somewhere that still needs you to finish what you never could? And if you do, is it mercy or punishment? What if the gods send you not to rest but to learn? I didn't ask to return, but when I saw her face, those eyes I swear I'd known in another life, I realized this wasn't about saving lives anymore. It was about understanding why I was given another one. They say every soul gets a second chance. Mine began the day I was supposed to die. The first days were a blur of fever and noise. I drifted between sleep and waking like a man floating in cold water, each breath uncertain, each heartbeat a question. The body I inhabited, Arden's body, was stronger than mine had ever been, yet it felt alien, like a borrowed coat still warm from another man's skin. When I finally woke for good, it was night. The ceiling above me was low, made of rough planks sealed with ash and resin. A single oil lamp burned near the door, its flame trembling as though afraid of its own light. A woman sat beside my bed. She wore a coarse brown dress and a white scarf that framed her face. Her eyes, gray-green, sharp yet gentle, followed every twitch of mine. When I stirred, she froze. Then in a whisper so careful it almost broke, she said, "You live." Her name, I would learn later, was Ilara. She was the healer's apprentice of a small village called Darren Hollow, a place that smelled of pine and smoke, where people bowed to the moon and buried their dead with coins on their tongues. 100 souls, maybe fewer, surviving between mountains and superstition. They told me I had been found by the riverbank, unconscious, with a gash on my temple and a sword nearby. A mercenary, perhaps. A deserter. No one knew, and neither did I. In the days that followed, I tried to understand the rhythms of this world. The air was clean but heavy with the scent of burning herbs. The nights were darker than any I'd known, and stars so sharp they seemed to hum. I could hear wolves at the edge of the woods and church bells from miles away. But what unnerved me most wasn't the strangeness. It was the silence of machines. No cars, no phones, no hum of electricity, only fire, breath, and wind. My hands itched for the instruments I once used: scalpels, sutures, sterile gauze. Instead, I had coarse linen, crushed roots, and superstition. When a child fell sick with fever, Alara crushed leaves into a paste and whispered prayers to the goddess of breath. I bit my tongue and watched. The rational part of me screamed that the child was septic, that a simple antibiotic could save him. But there were no antibiotics, only hope and trembling hands. That night, I slipped into the storeroom where she kept her herbs. Under the pale moonlight, I crushed willow bark, salt, and a handful of mold scraped from stale bread. Crude, uncertain, but the memory of penicillin stirred in my mind like a ghost. When I gave the child the mixture, the others looked at me as though I had broken a sacred law. By dawn, his fever broke. When Alara saw him breathing easier, color returning to his cheeks, she turned to me, eyes wide, lips parting, as if to ask what I had done. But before she could speak, the elder burst in, a man with a voice like gravel and eyes like coal. "What did you feed the boy?" he barked. "Medicine," I said. "Of a kind." "There is no such thing," he hissed. "Only the gods heal." He ordered me out. I left without protest, though my pulse drummed with anger. Outside, the dawn was cold and gold, washing over the village roofs like forgiveness. Ilara followed me, her steps soft in the frost. "What did you use?" she asked. I hesitated. "Something from where I come from." "Where is that?" "Far," I said. "Too far." She studied me, and in her eyes I saw something dangerous: curiosity. In the days that followed, people whispered. Some said I was a witch, others called me blessed. The elder forbade anyone from speaking to me, yet mothers began leaving small offerings by my door: dried fruit, candles, whispered thanks. Fear and faith, always twins. I spent my nights studying what little they had: herbs, minerals, scrolls inked with drawings of stars and symbols I didn't recognize. I began to piece together their beliefs, their medicine, their hierarchy. Knowledge was survival, and survival was the only way forward. One evening, Alara came again, bringing bread and broth. She lingered by the doorway as I worked, her fingers twisting the edge of her shawl. "You shouldn't have done it," she said quietly. "The boy would have died," I replied. "I know, but the elder—" She lowered her voice. "He fears what he cannot name. He says the gods marked you." I smiled faintly. "If gods marked me, they have poor handwriting." She tried not to laugh, but failed. That was the first time I saw her smile. Not the gentle, careful smile of a healer, but something unguarded, alive. Later that night, as I stepped outside, I looked toward the mountains. A storm was building, the kind that could swallow a man whole. The air smelled of snow and omen, and for the first time I felt something stirring beneath my calm. Not fear, not wonder, but belonging. Maybe this world was broken, maybe it needed fixing, and maybe, just maybe, that was why I was here. I sat by the fire and watched the flame bend in the wind. Behind me, Alara hummed a tune I half remembered from a life long gone. It was absurd, impossible, but as her voice drifted through the smoke, I swore I'd heard it once before. A song my mother used to hum while washing dishes after midnight. I closed my eyes. This world, this body, this borrowed name, none of it made sense. But her voice did, and that was enough to make me stay. The fever broke across the village like a passing shadow. There one day, gone the next. Mothers whispered prayers of thanks to gods they could not name, and men nodded toward me in silence when they thought no one was watching. Gratitude here was a quiet thing, spoken with lowered eyes. But gratitude turns quickly to fear. Always has. By the third sunrise after the boy's recovery, rumors began to spread. Not from the villagers, but from beyond the hills. Traders passing through Darren Hollow carried tales of the man who healed with rot, the foreigner who defied the gods. I heard them from a child who overheard his father speaking near the well. He said my name like a curse. I tried not to care. But the truth was, I had been in this world long enough to know what fear could do. Fear here wasn't just emotion, it was law, and the law could hang a man for what it didn't understand. Still I worked, quietly, methodically. The habits of my old life guided me. Observation, precision, deduction. When the well water turned cloudy, I noticed the livestock were sick too. I dug near the stream and found animal waste bleeding into the riverbed. Contamination. Primitive but predictable. I told the villagers to boil their water. They laughed. Firewood was scarce, they said, and boiling was for cowards who feared the goddess of purity. So I built a clay filter instead. Simple layers of sand, charcoal, and gravel. When I poured muddy water through and caught the clear drip below, they stared as if I'd split the sea. Ilara was there, of course, always watching, half trusting, half fearing. Her curiosity had become a fragile bridge between us. She followed my work, asked questions, even took notes. Scraps of parchment filled with neat lines of symbols. I realized one evening, as she sketched the filter beside me, that she was more intelligent than anyone here gave her credit for. "Why do you do this?" she asked, eyes never leaving her writing. "Because it works." "I mean, why help us?" "I'm not sure," I said after a pause. "Maybe it's habit, maybe guilt." "Guilt? I've watched people die for nothing before. I don't want to again." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said something that would stay with me far longer than it should have. "Maybe the gods sent you here to remember what it feels like to save someone, not something." It struck deeper than she knew. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat outside watching the fog roll over the hills, thinking about the boy who lived, the woman who watched, and the world that wasn't mine. I thought about my old life. Hospitals, fluorescent lights, the beeping of monitors, the constant war against time. I used to think saving lives was the same as living one. Maybe I was wrong. The next day, the elder summoned me. His hut was lined with relics. Bones of birds, dried flowers, a bowl of ash. He didn't speak at first, just stared, eyes burning through me. "They say you cleanse water," he began. "I do," I replied, "and that you use earth and stone to heal. Charcoal, it absorbs impurities." He frowned. "You speak of the world like a butcher speaks of meat. No reverence. Reverence doesn't keep people alive." That was the wrong answer. He rose, slow as an executioner. "This village was built by faith, not cleverness. Men who think they know better than the gods are punished. Do you understand me, stranger?" I did, more than he knew. I had seen men like him before. Surgeons who played gods with scalpels. Priests who called it mercy. The same arrogance, just wearing a different robe. When I left, Alara was waiting outside, worry shadowing her features. What did he say? He warned me not to play God. "And will you stop?" I smiled faintly. "Would you?" Her silence was answer enough. The following week, rain came, long and heavy, turning the paths to rivers. The villagers huddled indoors, praying the flood would pass. I spent my time mending tools, mapping herbs, writing what I remembered of medicine onto scraps of bark. Knowledge felt fragile here, like a flame in the wind. Then came the night of the storm. I woke to shouting, a child's voice, terrified. I ran outside barefoot, rain stinging my face. The river had risen, breaking its banks. A wooden bridge was collapsing under the force, and a small figure clung to the railing, screaming. Alara was already there, skirts soaked, reaching out with both arms. "Arden!" she cried. My borrowed name, sharper than thunder. I ran. My legs were slower than they should have been, heavy with another man's weight. The bridge cracked underfoot. I grabbed the child just as the railing gave way, thrusting him toward Alara before the current swallowed me whole. Cold, violent, endless. The river dragged me under, slamming me against stone, spinning me through black water. I clawed upward and broke the surface, coughing. Lightning flashed, and in that instant, I saw her on the bank, holding the boy, eyes wild. I swam toward her, half blind, half dead. When I reached the shore, she fell to her knees beside me, pressing her palms to my chest. "Breathe," she said. I did. Water poured from my mouth. My lungs burned like they were on fire. "You could have died," she whispered. "I already did," I rasped. For a moment the world stilled. No rain, no thunder, only the sound of her breath. Later, as she wrapped my shoulder in linen, she said softly, "You don't belong here." I looked at her. "No, but maybe you were meant to come anyway." Outside, the rain slowed to a whisper. Inside, the firelight flickered against her face, painting it in shades of gold and ash. She looked at me as if she wanted to ask everything, but didn't know where to start. I should have told her the truth then. Who I was, what I'd lost, the life I'd left behind. But I didn't. I just watched her hands move, steady, graceful, and thought of all the lives I'd touched in the other world, and all the ones I might still save here. Before I slept, I heard her humming again. That same song, that same impossible melody from my other life. And I began to wonder, was it coincidence or memory? 3 weeks passed before the next storm, and when it came, it wasn't made of rain. It began with whispers. A trader found dead near the pass, his wounds strange, not the work of wolves or men. The elder called it divine punishment, proof that the gods were angry. The villagers nodded and prayed harder. But fear is a contagion of its own. By dusk, they said the stranger had brought it upon them. They said I had. I was mending a fence when they came. 3 men carrying torches and fear in equal measure. One of them, Bren, the blacksmith, had always nodded to me at the well. Now his face was hard, his hand white around the haft of his axe. "The elder wants you at the square," he said. "Now?" "Now!" I followed. The square was nothing more than a circle of packed earth surrounded by low huts, but tonight it looked like a courtroom. The villagers gathered in the glow of torches, faces half lit, half lost in shadow. At the center stood the elder, robes heavy with rainwater and self-importance. "Ilara," I whispered, spotting her among the crowd. Her expression was unreadable, a mix of worry and something else. Resolve, maybe. The elder raised his staff. "This man," he said, voice ringing like a bell over the crowd, "has defied the gods. He meddles with sickness and speaks of false cures. He has brought wrath upon us." The people murmured. Someone threw a stone. It missed, but the sound it made against the mud was louder than thunder. I stepped forward. "You speak of wrath," I said, calm but shaking inside. "But what I've done saved your children, your families." "Blasphemy," he snapped. "The fever was taken by the gods' mercy, not your trickery." The crowd stirred again. I could feel their fear tightening around me like rope. I wanted to tell them about bacteria, infection, medicine, but words like that were poison here. So I said nothing. Then Alara stepped forward. "Elder," she said softly, but her voice carried, "if the gods are merciful, then they do not punish mercy." He turned on her. "You defend him?" "I defend truth. There is no truth outside the gods." "Then the gods must be smaller than I thought," she said. A gasp rippled through the square. For a heartbeat, even the flame seemed to falter. I saw it in his eyes. Not fury, but fear, because she had spoken what others only thought. "Take her," he ordered. "Both of them." Hands seized my arms. Elara didn't resist as they bound her wrist beside mine. The elder raised his staff. At dawn we will cleanse this place. The river will take them both. They dragged us to the edge of the woods and left us in a hut guarded by 2 men. The rain began again, soft at first, then relentless. Water dripped through the thatch, soaking the straw beneath us. For a while we said nothing. Then Elara laughed, a quiet, trembling sound. I think I preferred your kind of storm, she whispered. You shouldn't have spoken for me. I didn't. I spoke for myself. She looked at me then, and her eyes were steady. You changed things here, Arden. You showed them fear isn't sacred. That's why they hate you. Hatred's a fine reward for trying to help, I muttered. It always is, she said, but it means you did something that mattered. I stared at the wall, rain dripping in rhythm. In my world, they call this progress. In ours, she said, they call it heresy. Hours passed. The guards dozed, drunk on cheap mead. The storm outside grew heavier, drowning their snores in thunder. I tested the ropes. The knots were clumsy. Elara, I whispered, can you reach the blade on my belt? She shifted closer, fingers brushing against mine. The warmth of her skin through the cold rope made my heart stumble. She worked the blade free, cut my bindings then her own. Now what? She breathed. Now, I said, we run. We slipped out into the rain. The guards didn't stir. The world was a blur of mud and water, lightning flashing like the gods themselves were watching. We ran through the trees, feet sinking in soaked earth, lungs burning. I didn't know where we were going, only that it was away. When we reached the ridge above the valley, dawn was a gray bruise on the horizon. Below us, Darren Hollow slept beneath a veil of fog. We can't go back, she said. No, I agreed. Not yet. We found shelter in the ruins of an old chapel, its roof caved in, walls covered in moss. I started a fire with damp wood, coaxing the flame like an apology. She sat beside me, wrapping her arms around her knees. Do you ever wish you'd stayed silent? She asked. In my old life, silence killed people, I said. So no. Her head turned sharply. Your old life? There it was. The question I had avoided since the day I woke in this world. I wasn't born here, I said quietly. I come from another time, another place. I don't know how or why. I died and then I woke up in this body. She stared at me, searching my face for the lie. When she didn't find it, she whispered, Then what are you? I don't know anymore, I admitted. But I know this. Wherever I am, people are still afraid of what they don't understand. She looked into the fire for a long time. Maybe you were sent here to change that. Maybe I was sent here to learn that I can't. We sat in silence until the storm faded. Then faintly from the valley below came the sound of bells, morning bells. The elder was performing the cleansing ritual. To them, we were already dead. I thought of the boy I'd saved, the water I'd purified, the lives I might have touched without even meaning to. And for the first time, I wondered if my death in that other world wasn't an ending, but a transfer of debt. A debt the universe expected me to pay here. Elara fell asleep beside the fire, her head resting against my shoulder. The first light of morning touched her hair, turning it gold. I reached out, almost without thinking, and brushed a strand away from her face. She stirred but didn't wake, and there in that quiet ruin, with the world below us calling for our blood, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not fear, not guilt, purpose. Whatever this new life was, it wasn't a punishment. It was a test. And I wasn't done yet. We followed the river north for 2 days. It cut through the hills like a scar, narrow, silver, and cold enough to numb the bones. Elara said it would lead to the forest of Lear, a place people rarely went. They say the trees there whisper your sins, she told me on the first night. Maybe that's why no one stays long. I told her sins were quieter when you stopped running from them. She didn't answer. The road became less a path and more a tangle of roots and mud. I'd never walked so far barefoot, never known silence so vast. The forest wasn't dead, just listening. It creaked and murmured, branches trading secrets in the wind. When we finally stopped, it was near a half-collapsed watchtower by the river bend. Moss had eaten half its stones, but it offered shelter. I built a fire while Alara fetched water. The flames caught slowly, painting her face in flickering amber. She looked exhausted, yet there was a light in her I couldn't name, something steadier than fear. "You've done this before," she said, nodding to the fire. "Once or twice," I replied. "In your world?" "Yes." "Was it so different there?" I hesitated. "Different rules, same people." That made her smile faintly. "So not better?" "No," I said, "just louder." We ate roots and berries that night, and I tried not to think about how absurd it was, a surgeon eating raw plants in a world without penicillin. But as the fire burned lower, she asked, "What was it like, dying?" The question hit me harder than I expected. "I remember heat," I said slowly, "the kind that isn't outside you but inside, like every part of you realizing all at once that you're not going to make it. And then stillness, as if the world took one long breath and decided not to exhale." She stared into the fire, eyes wet with reflection. "Do you think we die more than once?" "I used to think once was enough," I said. "Now I'm not sure." Silence settled, the kind that doesn't ask to be broken. In the days that followed, we learned to move like ghosts, taking only what the forest gave, avoiding open paths. The bond between us grew in the quiet tasks of survival. Her steady hands when I built traps, my crude jokes when she stitched a torn cloak. We spoke little of Darren Hollow, as if naming it might summon its ghosts. One evening after rain, she found a wounded stag tangled in vines. Its leg was slashed, bleeding badly. I knelt beside it, pressing my palm to the wound. The smell of blood was sharp, real, human. Reflex took over. I tore my sleeve, cleaned it with stream water, applied pressure. Alara watched, wordless, as I packed the wound with crushed moss and bound it with bark and cloth. The animal trembled, but did not fight. When I finished, I let out a breath. "It'll live." She tilted her head. "You sounded like you knew that." "I used to do this for people." She smiled sadly. "Maybe you still do." That night she couldn't sleep. I could hear her breathing, shallow, restless. So I asked, "You're afraid?" "No," she said. "I'm remembering." "What?" "My mother. She used to say the gods test us by giving us what we think we can endure." "Do you believe that?" She looked at me through the dim light. "I believe you might be the test." I laughed softly. "That's not fair to either of us." "Nothing about life is." In the morning, mist blanketed the forest. She stood near the river, washing her hands in silence, her reflection rippling beneath her. For a brief moment, I saw two of her, one solid, one shimmering, and I felt again that strange echo, as if our souls had once brushed against each other long before this lifetime. Later that day, we found an abandoned cabin. Inside were the remains of a loom, a broken chair, and a book sealed shut by wax. When I opened it, the pages were filled with sketches, constellations, herbs, diagrams of the human body, crude but recognizable. It was knowledge, ancient, half forgotten, but real. "Whoever lived here knew things," I said. "Maybe someone like you," Ilara murmured. "Or someone who didn't live long enough to explain." We took the book. That night we studied it together. She traced the drawings with her fingertips while I deciphered the meaning. Pressure points, herbal mixtures, notes about the humors of the body. Primitive, but a beginning. As the hours passed, our shoulders brushed. Once, twice. Neither of us moved away. When I looked up, she was watching me. Not the way one studies a stranger, but the way one tries to memorize something fragile. If you could go back, she asked quietly, would you? To my world? Yes. I thought about hospitals, sterile corridors, endless nights of exhaustion, about lives saved and lost, the arrogance of believing you could outwit death. Then I thought of her, the way she looked at the world, still believing in kindness despite everything. I don't know anymore, I said. Maybe I was sent here because I stopped wanting to live there. She said nothing, only nodded. Then she leaned forward, resting her forehead against mine. Not a kiss, not yet, just contact. Human, trembling, real. Then live here, she whispered, at least until the gods find you again. Outside the forest sighed. The rain began softly, a rhythm against the roof, steady as a heartbeat. I wanted to tell her I was afraid of losing this, of waking up again somewhere else, in another body, another time. But instead I said nothing. I just reached for her hand. It felt like the first time I had ever done something right. We stayed in the forest for weeks, long enough to forget the rhythm of village bells and the sound of other voices. The world beyond the trees became a rumor, and the quiet between us turned into something almost sacred. We hunted, learned the paths of deer, and built a life that was half memory, half invention. But peace is a fragile thing. It always breaks under the weight of purpose. One morning I found Alara bent over the book we'd taken from the cabin. She had drawn symbols across the dirt floor, circles intersecting lines, letters that were neither theirs nor mine. When she looked up, her eyes shone with the fire of discovery. Arden, she said, these pages, they speak of the breath of the earth. It's not prayer, it's medicine. I knelt beside her. Show me. She pointed to a passage describing an herb that could draw the rot from within, a kind of mold that grew where damp met decay, something I knew all too well. Penicillium, in another life. I felt a shock of recognition so sharp it almost hurt. If this is what I think it is, I said, it can save people. Real medicine, not faith. Her eyes widened. Then we must return. To Darren Hollow? Yes, they hate you, but they're dying without you. The fever spreads again. The traders spoke of it in the last camp we passed. I hesitated. The last time I'd stood in that square, they'd called me cursed. But I remembered the boy whose fever had broken, the mother's trembling thanks, the fragile hope in her eyes. Knowledge had a price, but so did silence. That night I couldn't sleep. The forest whispered around me, restless, as if aware of what we planned. When Alara finally drifted off, I sat by the dying fire, staring into the embers. The red glow pulsed like a heartbeat. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. 3 notes, low and mournful. In my old life, I used to tell interns that every discovery begins with disobedience. The trouble was, I'd never learned when to stop. At dawn, we packed what little we had and set out. The journey back took 4 days, each one colder than the last. When we reached the outskirts of Darren Hollow, the air stank of sickness, rot and smoke, the smell of helplessness. They saw us before we reached the gate. A crowd gathered, thinner than before, eyes hollow. The elder was gone, replaced by a young man in rough armor, a soldier from the capital by his bearing. Strangers aren't welcome, he said flatly. We're not strangers, Alara replied. We're healers. He almost laughed. Healers? The last healer they had burned half the temple trying to prove he was a prophet. Then let us prove we're not prophets, I said. Just let us help. He studied me, frowning. You're the one they called the cursed man. Maybe, I said, but I'm the cursed man who cured their fever once. The soldier hesitated, then nodded toward the huts. If you're lying, you'll burn before nightfall. Inside the village, It was worse than I'd imagined. The sick lay in straw beds, shivering under damp cloths. Children coughed until they bled. The wells had gone foul again, and the only cure left was prayer. I went to work. I crushed bark, scraped mold, boiled water, filtered what I could. Ilara moved among the patients, her voice steady, her hands sure. The people watched, fearful but desperate. When the first child stopped shivering, a whisper passed through the crowd. Hope, tentative and trembling. But hope breeds envy, and envy breeds danger. By the third day, the soldier came again. The people talk, he said. They say you command spirits. I command nothing, I said. Only reason. Reason doesn't keep the peace. He left me with that. The message was clear. Miracles were welcome until they frightened the wrong men. That night, I found Ilara outside, sitting by the riverbank. The moon was high, silver on her hair. She looked tired, older somehow. They won't let you stay, she said. I know. Then why risk it? Because I remember what it's like to lose everyone. She turned to me, eyes wet. And when they turn on you again, then I'll go, but not before I've done what I can. She smiled, and small, sad. You never learn. I wasn't sent here to stop learning. The next morning we woke to shouting. Smoke curled from the far side of the village, the granary on fire. A mob gathered, torches in hand, rage in their eyes. The cursed man brings ruin again, someone cried. He poisons our food. The soldier pushed through them, blade drawn. Stay where you are, he barked. But the mob surged forward, unstoppable. Ilara grabbed my arm. We have to run. No, I said. Running only proves them right. I stepped toward the crowd, raising my voice. You think I bring ruin? Look at your children. Look at them breathe. A stone struck my shoulder. Another grazed my cheek. The soldier shouted again, but his men hesitated. Fear was winning. Then, a voice cut through the chaos. Enough! It was the boy I'd saved months ago, now taller, pale but alive. He stumbled forward, clutching a wooden charm. He saved me, he cried. He saved me when no one else could. The mob faltered. The soldier's gaze shifted. I lowered my voice. You want to burn someone, burn me after the sick are healed. But if you stop now, more will die before dawn. The soldier hesitated, then slowly sheathed his blade. 1 week, he said. Heal them, or I finish what they started. The crowd dispersed, muttering. The fire in the granary burned out. Ilara came to me, trembling. You're insane, she whispered. Probably, I said, but it bought us time. She laughed through her tears, and for a moment I forgot the weight of it all. That night she fell asleep with her head on my chest. The air smelled of ash and damp earth. Outside, the village was quiet, too quiet. I knew peace wouldn't last. Knowledge never came without a price, and I'd just signed the bill with both our names on it. Still, as I watched her sleep, one thought refused to leave me. If this world would burn for truth, then I would burn with it. The fever passed like smoke, leaving the village trembling in its wake. The people began to look at me differently, not quite with love, not quite with trust, but with something that felt dangerously close to both. Mothers bowed their heads when I passed. Men nodded at me, their pride softening into quiet respect. But respect can be a knife with two edges. By the fourth day, the soldier, Captain Dallin he called himself, had stopped pretending he was only here to keep order. He watched me with the suspicion of a man who knows power when he sees it. Power, to men like him, was something to own or destroy. You make them follow you, he said one morning, his voice flat. They follow hope, I answered. He smiled thinly. Hope is a dangerous thing when it doesn't wear a uniform. He turned and left, boots crunching on frost. I knew then the storm wasn't over. It had simply changed form. Ilara saw it too. That night she came to me, her shawl drawn tight around her shoulders. "He's afraid of you," she said. "I've seen fear like his before," I replied. "It always ends the same way." "How? With someone bleeding?" She didn't argue. Instead, she reached into her satchel and pulled out something wrapped in cloth, a necklace strung with a shard of green glass. "My mother's," she said. "She believed it protected the soul from envy." "And you believe that?" "I believe you're going to need it." I wanted to tell her that glass and gods couldn't stop a bullet or a sword, but I took it anyway. 2 nights later, the boy I'd saved returned. He stood at my door, breathless, clutching a bundle of parchment. "They're coming," he whispered. "Not the villagers, the men from the capital. The captain sent for them. He says you're building unrest." Ilara paled. "How long?" "Tomorrow." I dismissed the boy and closed the door. The fire flickered between us. Ilara looked at me, her voice trembling. "You can't fight them, Arden." "I don't plan to." "Then run. And leave them to die when the fever comes back? When Dallin uses their fear to rule them?" She slammed her fist on the table. "You can't save everyone." "I know," I said softly, "but I can't stop trying." The silence that followed was unbearable. She turned away, arms folded, shoulders shaking. When she spoke again, her voice was raw. "You think this is some test of fate, some divine purpose. But maybe it's punishment. Maybe you were sent here because you never learned how to let go." Her words struck deeper than any blade. "I had a patient once," I said quietly. "A child. She was dying. I told her mother I could save her. I believed it. But I was wrong. She died on the table." Ilara turned, eyes wide. "The mother never spoke to me again. And the day after the funeral, I swore I'd never promise what I couldn't deliver. Yet here I am, doing it all over again." The fire crackled between us. I don't know what she saw in my face then, but something in her expression softened. She came closer, reached out, and touched the scar on my temple. "You're not cursed, Arden," she whispered. "You're haunted." I laughed bitterly. There's not much difference. Before dawn, the sound of hoofbeats filled the valley. The king's banners gleamed in the first light, black and gold, the color of judgment. Soldiers poured into the square, torches in hand, armor slick with frost. Captain Dallin rode at their head. Ilara and I watched from the edge of the wood. "If you go down there," she said, "they'll kill you. If I don't, they'll burn the village." She grabbed my arm. "Then let me go instead." "Why you?" "Because they won't kill me. They'll listen to me." I shook my head. "You don't know men like him." "I know faith," she said, "and they still think I have it." Before I could stop her, she slipped from the trees and walked toward the square. Her steps were slow, deliberate. The soldiers turned at once, raising their spears. Dallin smiled. "Ilara," he said, "the lost healer returns." "I return with truth," she said calmly. "You're chasing the wrong ghost. The man you fear is not a curse. He's a cure." The crowd murmured. Dallin dismounted, circling her like a wolf. "And what would a woman of faith know about cures?" She looked him straight in the eye. "Enough to see when sickness wears armor." The square fell silent. Even the torches seemed to hesitate. Dallin's smile faltered. "You speak like a heretic." "Then burn me with him," she said. My heart stopped. That was when I stepped out. "Let her go," I said, walking into the torchlight. "This isn't her fight." Dallin's eyes glittered. "It is now." He drew his sword. "You claim to heal the sick. Heal this." He thrust the blade downward into the ground between us. "Kneel, and perhaps I'll spare the witch." I met his gaze. "You're sick, Captain. Not of the body, of fear, and I can't heal that." For a heartbeat, he hesitated. Then he swung. The world narrowed to sound and motion, the hiss of steel, the rush of blood. I dodged, grabbed a fallen spear, parried. The crowd shouted, scattered. Dallin lunged again. Too fast. I deflected, twisted, and his own weight threw him forward. His sword struck the ground, splintering the handle. He froze, stunned. I could have killed him then. I didn't. I dropped the spear instead. "It's over," I said. He spat blood, eyes blazing. "No," he hissed. "It's only begun." Before I could move, his hand shot out, pulling the trigger of a small flintlock at his belt. The crack of the gunshot split the air. Ilara gasped. For a moment, I didn't feel the pain. Just heat, then cold. I looked down. Blood bloomed across my shirt like a red flower. She was at my side before I fell. "No, no, stay with me," she whispered. "Don't cry," I murmured. "Not yet." The soldier stood frozen. Dallin staggered backward, eyes wide with disbelief. At what he'd done, or what it meant, I couldn't tell. The villagers rushed forward. Someone struck Dallin down. Someone else lifted me onto a stretcher of torn cloth. I remember only fragments after that. Ilara's voice, sharp and trembling, the smell of herbs and smoke, the light fading into shadow. And through it all, one thought pulsed in my skull, clear and cruel. I had come here to heal, and now I was the one who needed saving. When I woke, it was to the smell of ash and iron. My chest burned with every breath. Somewhere close, fire crackled, and a woman's voice whispered my name over and over. Soft, desperate, breaking. "Arden, please." Ilara. I tried to open my eyes, but the light cut through me like glass. Shapes blurred. The ceiling above was made of rough beams. The inside of a barn, maybe. I felt the sticky heat of blood beneath my ribs. "Don't move," she said, pressing a cloth to my side. Her hands trembled, but her voice did not. "The bullet passed through. You'll live, but not if you keep proving the gods wrong." I forced a smile. "That's become something of a habit." Her eyes flashed. "It's not funny." I wanted to tell her I agreed, but laughter, bitter, absurd, was all I had left between the pain and the fear. The next few days blurred into fever. I drifted between consciousness and nightmare. Flashes of Dalen's face, of fire, of Ilara's hands slick with blood. I remember her whispering prayers she no longer believed in, as if she hoped even abandoned gods might listen for once. When the fever broke, I was weak but alive. She sat beside me, eyes hollow from sleeplessness. The world outside was quiet, unnaturally so. "What happened?" I asked. She hesitated. "The villagers rose up. After you fell, they turned on the soldiers. Some fled, some died. Dallin was taken by his own men. To face trial in the capital, they said. And the village?" She looked away. "They're afraid again. They think you've cursed them with your survival." I exhaled slowly. "So nothing's changed." "Something has," she said. "You lived." That should have comforted me, but it didn't. Living meant I'd failed to die when it might have meant something. For the next week, I couldn't walk far. Ilara tended to me, refusing to rest. She boiled herbs, ground roots, mixed pastes that smelled of damp soil and desperation. I recognized some of her work. Crude antiseptics, mixtures of her invention and mine. She had learned. Too well. "Rest," I told her one night. She shook her head. "You taught me not to stop." "That was a mistake." "No," she said quietly. "That was the beginning." Her words warmed me more than the fire ever could. But in her eyes I saw something else. Fear, not of death, but of choice. When I could finally stand again, the world beyond the barn was still. The snow had come early, turning the hills white and the river to glass. From the ridge I could see smoke rising from Darren Hollow. Slow, steady, not destruction this time, but survival. "They've rebuilt," Ilara said behind me. "At what cost?" "They believe again. In the gods. In you." I turned to her. "That's worse. They pray for you, Arden. They think your blood sanctified the ground." I laughed bitterly. Then the world truly is mad. She stepped closer. They're just people, Nathan. It was the first time she'd used my real name. I froze. How do you know that? You said it once, in fever, over and over. Nathan Cole. And you didn't tell anyone? She shook her head. No one would understand, but I want to. So I told her. Everything. The crash, the world of glass towers and burning engines, the lives I'd failed to save, the moment between life and death when time folded in on itself. When I finished, she was silent for a long time. Then she said, "So the gods you served were made of steel." "In a way," I said, "and I worship them as faithfully as any priest." Her gaze softened. "Maybe that's why they sent you here, to learn what faith feels like when there's no machine to save you." I looked toward the village again, the rising smoke blending into the clouds. If that's true, then I've failed the lesson. "No," she said gently, "you just haven't finished it." That night, as we sat by the fire, I saw her studying me, not with pity, but with something deeper. She reached for my hand. Her fingers were cold, her grip steady. "They'll come again," she said, "from the capital. They won't stop at fear this time. They'll want obedience." "I know. Then we have to leave." "And go where?" "Anywhere. There's more world than this valley." I looked at her, the only person who had ever truly seen me in either life. "If I leave, they'll die without medicine. If you stay," she said, voice breaking, "you'll die without meaning." She was right and wrong, and both truths tore through me like the same blade. I rose, unsteady but determined. The decision had already begun forming in the fever, a shadow of purpose I could no longer ignore. "Alara," I said, "if they come, promise me something." "No, you haven't heard it yet." "I don't need to. Promise me you'll run. You'll take what we've learned, the herbs, the cures, the knowledge, and keep it alive." Her eyes filled with tears. "You think this world deserves saving, but I think you do." I cupped her face in my hands, feeling the tremor beneath her skin. "I can't be both savior and survivor." "Then let me save you," she whispered. Her lips brushed mine, hesitant at first, then certain. The fire cracked beside us as if the universe itself paused to watch. I had kissed women before, in a life of coffee and sterile corridors, but none of them had felt like this. Like confession, absolution, and surrender at once. When she pulled away, she didn't cry. She only said, "If this is a test, I'll fail it with you." The next morning, the horns sounded in the distance. The capital's riders, cutting through the snow. The air grew colder. The villagers, terrified, gathered again in the square. And I knew what I had to do. I kissed Alara once more, tasting salt and silence. "Stay hidden," I said. "If I fall, live." Then I walked down the hill alone, into the cold. The snow fell harder, each flake melting on my skin like memory. I thought of my old world, of glass and engines and the hum of machines, and realized how quiet redemption could be when it finally came for you. The snow came down harder as I descended into Darren Hollow, soft flakes falling on a village that had seen too much death for its size. Smoke curled from chimneys, quiet and gray. The people stepped out from their homes one by one, watching me as if I were both ghost and savior. No one spoke, not at first. Then a woman, the mother of the boy I'd saved, knelt in the snow. The rest followed, heads bowed, breath rising like incense. "I'm not your prophet," I said. My voice cracked through the cold air. "I'm a man, flesh and failure. If you pray to me, you've already lost your God." But they stayed kneeling, because belief, once born of desperation, refuses to die. From the ridge above, the horns blared again. Soldiers, their banners black against the white horizon. The capital had come to finish what Dalen started. I turned to the crowd. "If you want to live, go. Hide your families. Don't fight. An old man stepped forward, trembling. They'll burn the village if we do nothing. They'll burn it anyway, I said. But you don't have to feed them your blood. They didn't understand. Maybe they never would. But they obeyed. Fear can mimic faith that way. By the time the first riders reached the square, it was empty, but for me, there were a dozen of them. Disciplined, armored, faces hidden behind steel. At their head rode a man in a crimson cloak, his armor etched with the sigil of the crown. He dismounted with the slow confidence of someone used to obedience. "I am Lord Halvin," he announced, "commander of His Majesty's Order of Purity. You are the one they call the reborn healer." "I'm the one they call cursed," I said. He smiled, a humorless thing. "Cursed, blessed, the same word depending on who holds the sword. You've unsettled the order of faith in this valley. The crown doesn't tolerate miracles without permission." "Then it's not a crown," I said. "It's a cage." He studied me. "You speak like a man who's lived too long." "I died once. It wasn't enough." He drew his blade, gleaming in the weak sun. "Then you'll die again. Properly this time." Behind him, soldiers dismounted. The air shimmered with cold and tension. But before he could give the order, a shout rang from the tree line. "Ilara!" She emerged from the woods, hood down, hair wild in the wind. In her hands, she held the book. Our book. The one filled with herbs, drawings, and proof that faith could coexist with reason. "Stop!" she cried. "He's not your enemy." Halvin's gaze shifted. "Another heretic." "She saved your soldiers' children when fever struck last winter," I said. "You just didn't know her name." For a heartbeat, hesitation flickered across his face. Then he raised his sword. "Burn them both." The soldiers moved. I reached for the knife at my belt, not to fight, but to buy time. But before I could act, Ilara was already running, straight toward me. "What are you doing?" I hissed. "Finishing what you started." She pressed something into my hand, the green glass pendant she'd once given me. "You said knowledge has a price," she whispered. "Then let it be me." I understood before I could stop her. "No," I shouted, grabbing her arm. But she broke free, stepped into the open, and raised the book high for all to see. "Look," she cried. "If you kill him, you kill truth itself." The soldiers froze. Even Halvin hesitated. The sight of that fragile book, something older than their faith, was more dangerous than any weapon. "Ilara, don't run," she said. "Live." The flames came before I could reach her. One of the archers, nervous, unthinking, loosed his arrow toward her. It struck the oil lantern hanging from the wagon beside her. Fire erupted, climbing the wood, leaping from plank to cloth to skin. The book fell open, pages glowing like dying wings. I ran into the fire. Someone shouted my name. Someone else tried to hold me back. The world became smoke and color and heat. I found her in the middle of it all, her hands reaching for the book even as the flames consumed it. "Ilara!" She looked up, eyes steady even through the pain. "It's all right," she whispered. "They'll remember the truth, not me." I dragged her out of the fire, coughing, burning, refusing to let go. When we reached the snow, she was trembling, the life in her fading with each breath. "You should have run," I said, my voice breaking. She smiled and faint, almost peaceful. "I'd rather be the reason you stayed." Her fingers brushed my cheek, then fell away. The world went quiet. No wind, no breath, just the soft hiss of melting snow around her body. I don't remember standing. I don't remember reaching for Halvin. Only the weight of the knife in my hand, the taste of smoke and blood. He didn't see me coming. The blade met flesh, and his eyes went wide. Shock, not fear. "You'll damn us all," he choked. "Already done," I whispered. When he fell, the soldiers didn't move. Maybe they saw the fire. Maybe they saw the madness in my eyes. Maybe they finally saw that faith had burned itself out. I knelt beside her again, the snow around her stained red. The glass pendant, her mother's charm, lay cracked beside her hand. I closed her fingers around it. The sky began to lighten, faint pink bleeding into gray. Dawn, a cruel one. I wasn't sent here to change the world, I said quietly, just to understand it. I pressed my forehead to hers, breathing her last warmth. And now I do. The soldiers left by dusk, taking Halvin's body but not hers. They feared her even in death. The villagers returned, silent, carrying buckets to douse what remained of the flames. No one met my eyes. When the fire was gone and only smoke remained, I buried her by the river, the same river that had first brought us together. The ground was frozen, but I dug until my hands bled. The last thing I placed on her grave was the broken pendant. The green glass caught the dying light like a tear that refused to fall. That night I sat beside the grave, watching the sky darken. Snow fell again, erasing footprints, softening memory. And somewhere in that quiet, a thought came to me. Not from grief, but from something older, deeper. Maybe love isn't what saves us. Maybe it's what finally teaches us what saving means. The river froze over 3 days after I buried her. The water that had once carried our reflections now lay silent and blind, sealing her beneath a world that no longer spoke our names. I didn't eat. I barely slept. I sat by her grave each morning until the frost numbed my hands and the pain dulled into something bearable. The villagers avoided me, though they left offerings. Bread, herbs, flowers that would wither by noon. Guilt is a currency, and they paid it in silence. I thought about leaving, about walking into the mountains and letting the cold take me the way fire had taken her. But I couldn't. Not yet, because the book, the one she died for, wasn't gone. It took me days to notice. The fire had burned the outer pages, but beneath the ash, the spine had survived. The ink, though blurred, was still legible in parts. She must have pressed it into the snow before the flames reached her fully. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside were drawings, familiar ones, of stars, constellations, herbs. But now with new eyes, I saw what I had missed before. The diagrams weren't random. They weren't just medicine. They were maps, star maps. Each symbol corresponded to a constellation visible from this valley, each line marking the movement of the heavens over seasons. And at the very center, drawn in thick ink, was a spiral, not unlike the storm I'd seen the day I died. A gate. My heart hammered in my chest. I traced the lines with my finger, following their pattern until I reached the edge, where a single sentence had been written in faded script. The breath of the earth opens where time remembers its wound. It made no sense, and yet it did. The forest, the river, the mountains, all places where earth and sky met, where the old world's pulse still beat beneath the soil. Maybe this world wasn't just where I had been sent. Maybe it was how I had been sent. That night I returned to the ruins where Lar and I had once studied together. I carried the book and a lantern. The walls were half swallowed by moss and snow, the roof cracked open to the stars. I laid the book on the stone table and began to match the drawings to the constellations above. My hands moved with the precision of the surgeon I had once been, the faith of the man I had become. When the final star aligned, the lantern flickered, once, twice, then went out. The darkness that followed wasn't empty. It breathed. A low hum filled the air, rising from the ground beneath me. The stone trembled. A ring of light spread outward, faint and shifting, like ripples in water. My breath caught, and then a voice, not a sound, not quite, more like the echo of memory given shape. Nathan Cole, I froze. You were not meant to change the world, it said. You were meant to remember what it means to live in one. The voice came from everywhere. The air, the earth, the pulse beneath my ribs. Who are you? I whispered. You called us gods. You built us from reason. Then you forgot why. It wasn't divine. It was something older, or maybe something I had once known. I thought of machines humming, circuits glowing, the voice of the old world, the echo of a civilization that refused to die even when it burned. Why me? I asked. Why here? Because you believed knowledge could save everyone. Because you forgot it could also destroy. Images flickered behind my eyes. The crash, the hospital, the patients I'd failed. Then Alara's face, her defiance, her faith. You were given a choice once, between control and compassion. You chose control. So we gave you what you could not measure, a world that breathes without you. And Alara, I said, my voice cracking, was she part of your test? The air went still. She was your answer. The light pulsed again, softer this time. The ring of energy began to fade, the hum dissolving into silence. I reached out, desperate, pleading. If you can send me here, send me back. Let me change it. Let me save her. She saved you. The light dimmed completely. The cold returned. I was alone again. For a long time I stayed there, kneeling on the cold stone, hand pressed to the place where the light had been. It pulsed faintly beneath my palm, like a heartbeat fading into distance. When I finally returned to the village, dawn was breaking. The first light caught the snow, turning it the color of her eyes. The people were already gathering, whispering prayers, tending to fires. They looked at me differently now, not as savior, not as heretic, but as something else, a man who had seen the truth and survived it. One of the elders, the same who had once thrown stones, approached me. The fever returns, he said, voice trembling. We have no healer now. I handed him the book. You do. He frowned at it. I can't read this. You will, I said. Teach your children. Let them learn. Let them question. He looked at me as though I had spoken another language. Maybe I had. When he left, I walked to the river one last time. The ice had cracked near the center, water whispering beneath. I knelt, touched the surface. Ilara, I said quietly, I think I understand now. It wasn't about saving the world or defying fate. It was about surrender, the kind that turns knowing into wisdom and loss into meaning. The wind rose, carrying snowflakes in a slow spiral over the water. For a moment, I thought I saw her reflection, faint, smiling, before it melted back into the current. I closed the book and pressed it to my chest. Thank you, I whispered. Then I looked to the horizon, where the mountains caught the morning light like a crown. It was time to walk again, not to escape, but to carry what she left behind. Her courage, her questions, her faith in a world that had forgotten how to believe. Maybe that was what resurrection truly meant. Not to return from death, but to keep walking when everything worth living for was gone. Spring came slowly that year, creeping into the valley as if afraid to disturb the ghost winter left behind. The snow receded, the earth softened, and green began to thread its way through gray. I stayed in Darren Hollow longer than I meant to. The villagers no longer called me cursed, though no one dared call me healer either. I was something in between, a reminder of both miracle and ruin. They gave me food, tools, silence. It was enough. Every morning I walked to the river, past Alara's grave. The pendant I had buried with her, her mother's charm, sometimes caught the sun through the thin soil, flashing once, like a signal from another world. I told myself I stayed for them, to teach, to rebuild, to ensure the fever never came again. But the truth was simpler. I stayed because leaving meant accepting that the story was over. And I wasn't ready for endings anymore. The children were the first to approach me again. They followed when I went to gather herbs, curious but cautious. One girl, the same age as the boy I'd once saved, asked me why the river spoke in winter and sang in summer. Because everything alive has a rhythm, I told her. You just have to listen long enough. She nodded solemnly and ran back to the others. And for a moment I believed that maybe the world could heal itself after all. That night I sat by the fire with the book open on my lap. I had copied Alara's notes into the margins, adding what I remembered from the life before. Each page had become a bridge between two worlds, reason and faith, science and song. I realized then what Alara had truly given me. Not love alone, but continuance. She'd turned knowledge into something that could survive even after we couldn't. When the capital's men returned months later, they didn't come with torches. They came with parchment and seal, a decree from the crown stamped in wax. "The king has heard of your work," said their captain, a young man with uncertain eyes. "He wishes you to serve in the royal infirmary, to teach what you know." The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd once sent soldiers to kill me for that same crime. I asked for a day to decide. That night I walked again to the river. The thaw had deepened. The current moved fast, fierce with renewal. I knelt by the bank and whispered, "What would you do, Alara?" The wind answered softly through the reeds, and though it had no voice, I heard her just the same. "Go, not to save them, to remind them why they deserve saving." By dawn, I gave the captain my answer. We left at first light. The villagers stood by the road to watch, their faces quiet but no longer afraid. Some nodded, some bowed. The old man who once threw stones pressed a pouch of seeds into my hand. "For the road," he said. "For new ground," I replied. The journey to the capital took weeks. Along the way, I saw the remnants of a kingdom losing faith in itself. Temples empty, farmlands abandoned, soldiers guarding silence more than peace. And yet, here and there, I saw signs of life. A child teaching another how to read, a farmer planting too early just to see something green. When we finally reached the city, its towers of stone rose like teeth against the sky. The infirmary lay near the heart of it, cold and vast, filled with men and women who looked half dead from exhaustion. I walked among them, feeling the weight of a memory I hadn't known I missed. The smell of medicine, the echo of footsteps, the fragile dignity of trying. I taught them what I could. Not miracles, not heresy, just hands steady enough to hold life without breaking it. I showed them how to boil water before tending wounds, how to listen to a fever instead of fearing it. Some resisted, others watched with hungry eyes. At night, when the halls fell silent, I wrote in the margins of the new ledger they gave me. "Knowledge alone cannot heal. Only kindness can do that." Months passed. The plague that had spread from the southern coast began to fade under new practices. Cleanliness, caution, compassion. The crown praised my discoveries, though I knew none of it was mine. Every cure bore Ilara's handwriting somewhere within it. One evening, as I watched the sun dip behind the spires, I realized something I hadn't felt in years. Peace, not as absence of pain, but as presence of meaning. And then, a sound. A whisper, faint but familiar, carried on the wind that slipped through the open window. A humming, soft and steady. Her song, the one she used to sing when nights grew long. I stood and followed the sound through the corridors, down the stairs, out into the courtyard. The air shimmered faintly, the same way it had that night in the ruins, the thin place between time and memory. In the center of the courtyard stood a tree I hadn't noticed before, young, slender, its leaves trembling in the dusk. At its base, buried in the roots, something glimmered, a shard of green glass, the pendant. I knelt, touched it gently. The glass was warm, almost pulsing. And then I heard her voice, not in the air, but within the space between heartbeats. You kept walking. I closed my eyes. I didn't know where else to go. That was the point, she said. The world doesn't need gods or saviors, Nathan. It needs witnesses, people who remember what mercy feels like. Tears came quietly without shame. I wish you could see what you started. I do. The air grew still. The warmth faded, but the peace remained. I opened my eyes and the courtyard was silent again. Only the young tree swayed, its leaves whispering secrets to the stars. I rose, breathing deeply, and looked toward the horizon where the city lights blurred into the sky. I realized then that life doesn't end when meaning fades. It simply waits for you to find it again. Maybe time hadn't sent me back to be forgiven. Maybe it had sent me back so I could forgive myself. I turned toward the infirmary, the book under my arm, her song still echoing faintly in my mind. There was work to be done. They say every soul gets a second chance. Mine wasn't given to rewrite the past, but to remember what love can make of a man who thought he'd already lived.